It's time for Ladies Can We Talk on 660 AM The Answer. Common sense talk with women and men about politics and standing up for America. With your host, nationally acclaimed speaker and author, Debbie Georgatos. Ladies Can We Talk starts now.
Good evening and welcome to Ladies Can We Talk. Thank you so very much for tuning in to Ladies Can We Talk for the next 2 hours. I'm Debbie Georgatos. I'm your host. I'll be talking with you about all sorts of issues. And on this show, Ladies Can We Talk, our fundamental point is always to understand and therefore preserve the goodness, greatness, uniqueness, the exceptionalness of America, to understand why it's a great country so we can perpetuate that for generations to come. We talk politics, but always from that perspective of defending America. And my second hour tonight, I always have two of my buddies, my leading ladies, join me in the second hour. And tonight I have Chris Davis and Mari Sullivan. And I'll give you a quick run through the show, and then I'm going to turn to my Speak Up for America segment, which I always do in this first 15 minutes. The quick run through is I actually pre-recorded a short interview with Dr. James Carafano. He's a vice president of the Heritage Foundation. He's a leading national security expert, and he will give us some amazing insights into basically the question, what will President Obama's foreign policy legacy be? We'll talk about that. It was a great interview. I can't wait to we'll do that at 6:30. Other things we're going to talk about tonight is, of course, John Boehner's departure or impending departure as Speaker of the House. He's actually leaving Congress also. We're going to talk about a few stories I'll run through briefly. San Francisco, there's a story out of San Francisco about their birth tourism industry exploding. Very interesting. These ties into birthright citizenship and what this action industry now in San Francisco. We're going to talk about in the second hour about the Afghan police and small boys and the American military. We're going to talk about Planned Parenthood funding and really the conundrum or the difficulty in deciding as responsible conservatives, what should government do? How far should conservatives go to try to fight funding Planned Parenthood in light of the videos that many of us have watched, which are just, hideous, and hardly you can't imagine them occurring in this otherwise civilized country. And we're going to talk about Donald Trump and the presidential race. And I'm going to touch on this first hour. I also want to share with you a story about climate change and what President Obama is doing in connection with China and what he's doing domestically. So if you take notes, get out your pen and your paper. We're time to roll. But in this first segment on Speak Up for America, I always try to talk about something that ties into a bigger principle about America. And we all watched this week as the Congressman John Boehner, who was the Speaker of the House, he announced the day after the Pope visited Congress, he announced to the surprise of, I think, almost everyone, that he was resigning, not just as Speaker of the House, but he was resigning as actually a member of Congress. As of the end of October, he will step down. And for people who are conservative and pay a lot of attention to politics, there was a lot of enthusiasm, or the news was greeted positively. People saying, wow, that's great. He's been someone we've been trying to get out of there for a long time. And I think many conservatives, and certainly Tea Party people and conservative Republicans, have said for a long time, one reason we don't get the conservative agenda through Washington, even though we elect increasingly strong Republican majorities in the House and Senate, is because good ideas get bottlenecked in the process in Washington. In fact, I was in Washington and went to this program that Heritage Foundation put on. Actually, I was in South Carolina, and they were talking about this process, how you think that you elect these great conservatives and they go to Washington, and lo and behold, they can't get these good ideas through. And people say, why? Why? Look at the numbers you have. You have the majority. Well, a lot of that has to do with the process in Washington, and in particular in John Boehner. I will say, I think the reason that people were really much of the Republican base. In fact, I think there were polls showing the majority of Republican primary voters wanted John Boehner to step down as Speaker of the House, is because on really big, significant, important issues facing America, he does not stand up. The Democrats have learned in this 6 years or almost 7 years now we've had President Obama in power, the Democrats have learned that the GOP leadership, House or Senate, will always, 100% of the time, capitulate on all the big issues. This is the lesson the Democrats have learned from watching how John Boehner runs the House and Senator Mitch McConnell runs the Senate. They've learned the idea that they, the Democrats, never have to give an inch, never have to compromise, don't have to negotiate, don't have to modify their positions. They simply say, we demand X, and that's what it's going to be. And because Republicans don't want to push things far enough to get to where they're saying, well, okay, we have the majority, so we are going to not fund something. We're going to stop funding something. We're going to stand up and fight. What the Democrats have learned, and why the base is so frustrated with John Boehner, is that they have learned Republicans won't fight. And because Democrats know this, there is almost no point in raising the important issues. And just a few examples. And I will tell you, I want to direct all of you to my website. Our new website is just incredibly cool. It's ladiescanwetalk.org, and we put statements about big issues. And we have a new statement up today, statement on the resignation of John Boehner. It lays out a lot of the points I want to mention to you, but the basic things I want to say is I think the personal jabs toward Speaker Boehner are pointless and classless, but on substance, which is what matters, the frustration or outrage, I think, is very justified. Look at the list of issues just facing our country in the last several years. You have President Obama simply passing or introducing executive orders, or he uses the trick of calling them executive memorandums. So some people try to say, oh, President Obama doesn't do that many executive orders. President Bush did more. Well, what President Obama does is calls them executive memorandum, and then that doesn't count in the tally. But I digress. Back to what happened in this last Congress. President Obama has, on some of the most major consequential issues facing America and the world, simply pushed his agenda through, whether it is all sorts of executive orders and special rules surrounding Obamacare, which he had no constitutional authority to do, whether it was, and which include things, and also in the whole area of immigration and amnesty, simply announcing changes in federal law that are not supported by the law the Congress passed, but just announcing amnesty or segmented amnesty or partial amnesty, changing law through executive order in the important arena of amnesty and immigration. This is something that the conservatives said, you've got to stop him, you got to fight, he can't do this, but no fights ever happen. And then the most current, astoundingly important, is the Iranian deal. This deal where we have negotiated to essentially give nuclear weapons to the single largest terror exporting country in the world, the single most dangerous country in the world, Iran. And the Iranian deal that President Obama negotiated, which should have been treated as a treaty, but it wasn't. That deal, Congress had some say over, but there's no fight. There's no backbone. There's no strength in the leadership of the GOP. And this is why the news of John Boehner's stepping down as Speaker of the House is so consequential. And I want to tie to a bigger principle about America. The basic idea in America, in the uniqueness of our founding, the uniqueness of the government we established, is that we, the people, have the power. We choose candidates. We elect our government. We can change our government. But if the process in Washington, the net result of the process in Washington is that we, the people, have chosen conservatives. We've chosen people we want them to go do X and not Y and stand up on these issues. And the process, and it goes to Washington, and the process bottlenecks. The idea is that the members of Congress that you have elected, and they go to Washington telling you, I'm going to go there and stand up for this and stand against that, but nothing ever happens. It has a lot to do with the process in Washington. And part of what has to change probably in Washington is the complexity involved in getting good ideas, getting bills out of the mouths and the hands of the elected officials and onto the floor of the U.S. House. The bottleneck of the Rules Committee, chaired by local Congressman Pete Sessions, the bottleneck of the entire leadership notion, where members of Congress are, the majority whip gets a hold of them and says, you're going to vote this way on this and this way on this. That whole process stymies the will of the people. And this is part of the reason people are so upset. I want to share a couple other things about where we are in this country and why it's so important that the GOP gets this right. There was a poll recently that was a very large poll. I think it was either Rasmussen or Gallup that said half of the entire American population continues to view their own government as an immediate threat. People see government growing in power, in scope, in how they control people, and they don't like it. And they want to hear people go to Washington and say, we're really going to mean it when we say we're going to get out of people's way. We're going to limit the size of government. We're going to control what government does. They want to hear strength out of their elected officials. And back to John Boehner for a moment, I have to say this is a teaching moment or a learning moment for the elected GOP in Washington, because right now, of course, as soon as John Boehner stepped down, there was immediate jockeying among the leadership in Washington over who's going to become Speaker, who will be elected by the members of the House to become the Speaker. Right now, our leadership set up in Washington in the GOP and the House side. We have Speaker, he's still, John Boehner, still Speaker of the House. We have Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy, Majority Whip Steve Scalise. We have the Republican Conference Chair Kathy McMorris Rogers, and the Republican Policy Committee Chair Luke Messer. Well, obviously, and we have the Rules Committee Chair, which is local Congressman Pete Sessions. He's not exactly in leadership, but that's a very, very, very powerful position. So as soon as John Boehner stepped down, all of those players, these people involved in the leadership in Washington, are vying to be either move up in leadership or to be the one named as Speaker. So a lot of conservatives, of course, gotten involved saying, please, elected Republicans, learn the lesson of why essentially John Boehner was driven out of office by conservatives. And I should have said something earlier, I meant to mention to you. Congressman Mark Meadows, whom I had the pleasure of meeting recently, he's a very good guy. Congressman Mark Meadows had actually introduced a motion to vacate the chair. It's a permissible motion by a member of the House to essentially say, I'm not saying who should be Speaker of the House, but I want the Speaker's chair vacated. I want Boehner gone. And John Boehner was scurrying around the House looking for votes to hold on to his speakership, and he was having to look into the Democrat ranks. He was having to look at Democrats to keep him in power. And this is a sign or a signal that something's way out of whack, that the person who's supposed to represent Republicans in Congress wants that power so badly that when he knows his own people, his own party, the people who were elected to represent Republicans in this country, he can't get enough of them to vote for him. He says, maybe I'll get support from my enemies and the other guys, the Democrats. This is, in this time in America, with all the issues we have facing us, the idea that that would be palatable to anyone, that the GOP Speaker of the House can only retain the job by getting Democrat support, that shouldn't be palatable or bearable to anyone. So a lot of people are talking about who should be elected Speaker of the House, and I guess I'm going to save that list because we're getting toward our break. I'm going to save that list for later, but I want to share one last thing. The whole idea of representative government in Washington is that you elect people who stand for your ideas. You expect them to go to Washington and to follow through on those ideas. And all that the GOP, the conservative base, the primary voters have watched in the last 6 years is a capitulation campaign by the GOP in Washington to go to Washington and pretty much surrender. And they always point to, we get to a government shutdown, which we're going to talk about later. That is the ultimate problem of the GOP standing strong is what is the outcome if the Democrats will never negotiate and never capitulate? Does the GOP have an issue strong enough to justify a defunding of something and withstanding a shutdown, which we're going to talk about a little later. But I'll tell you one last thing that if you have any doubt in your mind that it was time and long past time for John Boehner to get out of the Speaker of the House job, he has this job still through the end of October. There are rumors circulating and apparently being verified by people who know that prior to announcing his departure, John Boehner cut a deal with the House minority, Nancy Pelosi, the House minority leader, the leader of the Democrats in the U.S. House, cut a deal with her, essentially promising full funding for everything the Republicans stand against, promising he's got the Republican votes, the Republicans will stand with the Democrats and do every single thing President Obama wants. They will fund Planned Parenthood, they'll fund Obamacare, they won't block the Iranian deal, they will enforce all the president's executive actions on immigration. This is exactly why John Boehner needed to go. If this is true, now maybe it's a false rumor, but it's appearing to be true. What he's saying is, I care more about cutting deals and making my crony buddies happy up here and making a deal with Nancy Pelosi than I do with standing for the Republicans and the Republican values in this Congress. This is why John Boehner had to go. Well, this is Debbie Georgatos, and Ladies Can We Talk? And this is my Speak Up for America moment, or Speak Up for America segment on tonight's show. We're going to zip off to a break, and when we come back, we're going to play the interview I did with Dr. James Carafano. You will be amazed at the stuff you learn from him. He's a brilliant guy. He's a former Army veteran. He's an author. He's served in extremely high positions shaping U.S. policy. So he's a great interview. This is Debbie Georgatos. Ladies Can We Talk on 660 AM The Answer. Come on back after our break.